Well, thanks, Raymond, for the introduction. With that introduction, I think it's proper to make a few disclosures and disclaimers. I'm not here to endorse any particular product or supplement.
By the way, this is because he comes from America. You want to make sure nobody's going to sue him, huh?
And also to tell you I have no conflicts of interest, so I sleep well at night. But anyway, my training is in internal medicine. That's my basic training. Then I subspecialized in the lungs and in intensive care. So on a daily basis, I don't practice nutritional advice. I see patients with a lot of nutritional problems. As you can imagine, there's 28 million diabetics in the United States, and that is increasing by every year. And Aruba's health mirrors the United States. So there are nutritionists, there are life coaches, there are strength coaches, there are exercise specialists, there are pharmaceutical doctors, PharmDs. There's a lot of people in the healthcare/wellness industry, because they're not the same, that tend to give out nutritional advice. They say there are only a few topics in life that are very personal to people and are very touchy subjects to talk about. Religion, politics, nutrition, and sex. So this is one of them, and it's usually not something that people take lightly. So, and I understand all that. So whenever or whatever I mention today at the end when we have the Q&A, please feel free to question, critique, and ask me where it comes from and why I recommend it. But again, it's an evolving concept. So optimal nutrition today can change in 2 months, in 2 years, in 6 years, as evidence comes out. But this is as much evidence-based as possible. So I have some references at the end in a slide where you can go online and you can find several authors that I read frequently, and there's a lot of blogs. But everyone knows, Google is full of information, but not all of it is authoritative information. So anyway, we humans tend to obsess, with supplements, potions, elixirs, and medications. A lot of people try to find shortcuts in life. And when it comes to food and nutrition, I think there are few shortcuts. Honestly, it's one of the few things in life that you have to try to get to at a personal level. And what I mean with that is, if you can cook and prepare all your meals, and I know it's difficult, I don't do that myself all the time, but at least 60-70% of the time. If you're in control of what you're going to eat, rather than someone else preparing it for you, or just waiting to see what happens tomorrow at lunchtime, tomorrow at dinner time, you're not going to be in charge of your nutrition. So everything else that I'm saying past this slide then will have a 50-50 chance of failure. So this is something that if you don't stand in the kitchen, and I'm not talking becoming a chef, I'm just talking about preparing simple meals. So what happens then, people don't want to mess with this. So what do? We tend to look for shortcuts. So everyone is obsessing about what's the next supplement, what's the silver bullet, where can I find it, how often do I have to take it, how much do I have to pay for it. So I'm going to tell you right now, there is no shortcut. Food, the more it is processed, the minute it comes out of the ground, the less nutritious it is by the time it gets to your mouth. So that's going to be a premise throughout the whole talk. The least refined foods possible is what you need to be consuming. So think about it this way. When you're about to grab a food item, whatever food item it is, if it doesn't grow on a tree, if it doesn't come out of the ground straight with possible minimal processing, for example, a potato comes out of the ground but it's raw, so you have to boil it. So boiling is the only step that's considered a processing step. Then it's probably healthy for you. But a loaf of bread does not grow on a tree branch, and neither does pasta. So there are certain things that, rules of thumb. If you think about that and you just try to follow that, eat as least amount of processed food as possible in your life, you'll be okay. So if we want to talk about nutrition, we need to understand food. And if we want to talk about food, we have to understand nutrients. In the past, Raymond asked me to shorten the slides from 60 slides to 30 slides. And I did, but a few have to stay in there. And bear with me if the terminology gets a little bit technical, but I think some of this was maybe basic stuff in school. But if you understand what's inside your food, you'll probably understand why you're doing certain things and following certain recommendations. So the basic definition, this is a very basic and elemental definition of a nutrient. It's a component that's found in food, that's consumed by a living organism, whether it's a horse, a cow, a lizard, or a human being, and then it gets utilized for that organism to grow and to survive and to thrive in its environment. The nutrients are divided in two groups, macro and micro. Macro means large or bulk or a lot, and micro means a little, small. So the macronutrients are only 3. It's very simple to remember. There's not 28 choices here. There's only 3 things: fats, proteins, and carbs. So whenever we talk about nutrition and you talk about macronutrients, you're talking about fat, protein, and carbs. However, these fats, proteins, and carbs cannot be utilized by the body unless you actually have vitamins and minerals. And the vitamins and minerals, you only need very small amounts of, but they have to coexist together. What's lost very quickly as soon as food is processed, if any of the macronutrients, fats or proteins or carbs, are processed, what's lost the quickest and most easily is vitamins and minerals. That's why heating, canning, freezing, or pasteurization is usually what kills the nutritional value of a food, and then you're left with this. And if you just consume fats, proteins, and carbs by themselves, they only give you calories, but they're empty calories without nutritious value. I'll give you an example. Butter. A stick of butter is pure fat. There's no carbs in there and there's no protein. But if you eat 1 stick of butter for breakfast, 1 for lunch, 1 for dinner, and you do that for 3 months, you're sure to end up with a nutritional deficiency of your vitamins and minerals. Same thing with steak. If you grab a tenderloin or a ribeye steak, it's a piece of meat. It's pure protein. It has a little bit of fat in it. It doesn't have any carbs. So it's one of the macronutrients. But if you eat a steak for breakfast, a steak for lunch, a steak for dinner, and you do that for the next 6 months, you're going to end up with nutritional deficiencies. So even though the micronutrients are small, they're cofactors. They're essential in getting the chemical metabolic work done properly in your body. So as I mentioned earlier, the nutrients are best absorbed when you actually consume them close to or in their original state, as they come out of the ground, as the food is being harvested, so to speak. When you consume it whole, a whole food, then it's actually present in the matrix nature intended it to be. I'll give you an example, an apple. And yes, I'm going to say juicing is not something you should be doing daily. It's not something you should never do, but do that in moderation. And in moderation, I mean maybe once or twice a week. What happens with juicing? You put the apple into the juicer, and at the end, the other side, you have water and sugar. That's what comes out. 95% of the nutritional value was left behind inside the juicer as fiber. When you pick it out and you clean it up, you're throwing vitamins away, you're throwing fiber away, which helps the digestion and helps regularity of your bowel movements. So do you need to juice all the time? Definitely not, because what you're doing is you're actually refining that apple. Again, refined food. You're processing the apple down to water and sugar. Fructose is the sugar that is present in fruit. That's nature's form of sugar. So if you want an apple, eat it. Just eat the apple. If you want an orange, eat the orange. Sure.
Can I ask you something? Would that be the same with the NutriCard, for instance? NutriCard, it's not the same as
It pulverizes everything. Yeah, the NutriBullet, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not endorsing any products, particularly I'm not getting paid by them. So the name can be, it doesn't matter what brand name, but the concept of pulverizing the fruit and not juicing it and extracting and keeping the pulp and the husk is better, yes. So that would be a better alternative than actually juicing. If you were to, and sometimes in the morning for convenience, we want to get going, we don't want to, peel and mess around. Yeah, put an apple, put an orange, obviously peel the orange, and then use that particular device to pulverize it and then drink it. That's fine. You'll get the fiber, you'll get everything. But again, we were meant to chew. So it's good to eat the apple and occasionally juice that way. All right, just a quick example. On the left, in the left column, you can see processes that tend to preserve or minimally disrupt the nutritional value of food. Try to eat things raw. Of course, okra, you can't eat okra raw. You need to boil it. But if you can eat an apple raw, an orange raw, any fruit raw, try to eat it raw. Don't cook fruit. Steam very briefly. If you're going to eat veggies, just a quick, what they call blanch. Sometimes blanching means bringing water to a rolling boil, then throwing in the vegetable and taking it off the fire and waiting 60 seconds, then straining it. That's a blanch. That's a quick blanch. And actually what you sometimes see in some vegetables, it enhances the color. It just becomes bright green. And that's a good way, for example, to unlock the enzymes and the vitamins in that vegetable. If you have to boil the vegetable, for example, broccoli needs a little bit of boiling. I'd rather steam it than boil it. Don't go over a minute. So if you keep the vegetable in the water as the heat is on it and it's in a rolling boil, 60 seconds is all you need. Remember, our palates have been, mal-accustomed over the years. We go to restaurants, you order cauliflower and broccoli, and you grab your fork and you can mash it. I mean, that's overboiled or oversteamed. That's been steamed for 3, 4, 5 minutes. There's no nutritional value left there. All you're getting is fiber, which is still good because it's cellulose, so the cauliflower and the broccoli will help you move your bowels, but it's gone. Asparagus has to have a little crunch to it, and it has to actually get bright green when you put it in the boiling water and take it out. So be very careful when you steam your veggies. Keep them crisp. Train your teeth to chew. And chewing is important. You release a lot of enzymes. Digestion begins in the mouth the minute you pass your lips. Sprouting, again, alfalfa sprouts, broccoli sprouts. When you sprout seeds, they actually activate enzymes and nutritional components. Desiccating or dehydrating. Remember, plums become prunes or grapes become raisins. That's a way of preserving naturally. Back in the days before we had refrigeration, before we had electricity, that's how your ancestors did it. Meat, for example, dehydrated meat with salt to preserve it. That's how they crossed the Atlantic in ships when they had no freezers. This damages food. Any of these, I mentioned them earlier: canning, freezing, boiling, pasteurizing, and bleaching. So I'm not saying never eat it. Yeah. I have to move the slide, so I don't know. But try not to eat frozen foods. Sometimes some frozen vegetables still keep some of their nutritional value. All right, carbohydrates, the big evil macronutrient. So what do we want to know about carbs? They're basically a biological molecule contained of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, or C, H, and O. And the group of carbohydrates is divided in many subgroups. The simpler the carb, it's closest to the sugar as the parent carb. In the middle, we have starches, and at the other extreme, which is indigestible, is cellulose, and that's fiber. So when you eat a head of lettuce, when you eat cabbage, when you eat a carrot, most of that is going to come through as fiber. But again, they contain micronutrients. So the cellulose, you can take a shortcut by drinking Metamucil. Again, I'm not speaking negatively about any particular brand, but that's one of the brands of cellulose available on the shelf in a preparation that's soluble in water. But why would you have to do that? If you eat enough vegetables and enough fruits in your daily intake, you'll have regular bowel movements. Apes and other primates can digest plants very well. We don't have an enzyme to break down cellulose. So we need the carbs broken down by our digestive system to get them down to sugar so they can be absorbed. The problem is your digestive system was meant to do some work. Instead, if you take table sugar, which is white granulated sugar, and you ingest it directly, all the refinement, all the breakdown has been done industrially from sugarcane. And now you're just getting a massive load of sugar into the bloodstream. And what happens when sugar enters the bloodstream in a simple form? Quickly, it's followed by insulin. And insulin is a hormone that we need it. It's important for life, but too much of it leads to the epidemics we know of as obesity and overweight. So the smaller the carb, it's usually referred to as a sugar, and you'll hear the suffix of the word ending in O's. Sucrose, glucose, lactose, fructose, galactose, etc. Those are all sugars. So complex versus simple. Complex, starch. Flour is relatively complex. It's already a refined product. Remember, wheat, when it grows, in the field, it has to be milled down by a big mill to make flour. Now you have whole grain flour, which has a little fiber in it still, and you have white flour, bleached flour. So there is a degree of refinement also when you go to flour. But mostly that's complex. Legumes are some of the best complex carbs, and I'm going to mention a little bit of a diet here. I'm going to give some recommendations. This is all general, but then we're going to narrow down to a recommendation for diet. And I mainly focus on legumes because legumes are one of the best sources that nature offers in terms of slow release of carbs. There are also, some people call them slow carbs, and legumes are the best source. Potatoes and pasta, again, they come from the, potatoes come from the ground, pasta doesn't. Pasta is a refined product. Eat pasta in moderation. Potatoes you can eat every day, but again, not a lot, and I'll talk about portions later. So simple carbs, here are some names. Table sugar, you know, any candy you eat has sugar in it. Honey, and if you're eating a candy that's vegan and it doesn't have table sugar in it, but it's sweetened by agave nectar, what do you think agave is? It's sugar. There's 48 synonyms for sugar. Maltodextrin, and I can go on and on and on. Just remember, simple carbs are sugar, and there's many names for it, and you want to minimize the amount of sugar you eat per day. And if you want to actually go to nature's form of sugar, eat a fruit. This is a little bit of the same repetition. Avoid unrefined carbs, and animal carcass, in other words meat, has the lowest amount of carbs. Any piece of meat, chicken, turkey, beef, they don't contain any carbs. It's just pure protein and a little bit of fat. And milk does contain sugar, and it contains lactose. A lot of humans, it's estimated that about 60%, plus or minus depending on which medical studies you look at, estimate that 60% of humans at the age of 3 or 4 lose the ability to digest lactose. And remember, there's a little bit of lactose in mother's milk, human mother's milk. But we are the only mammal species on Earth that crosses to another mammal to drink their milk, the cow. No other animal does it. Biology programmed them for a reason that way. So I have a slide on dairy, and we can elaborate on that in the Q&A session later if you feel like it. But I personally advocate against no dairy products except for some fermented dairy products, which we'll touch upon later. Okay, a word about glycemic index, GI index. It's important to understand what this is, because this is why carbs, this is why we make distinction between simple and complex carbs. When you ingest a very simple sugar, the simplest form of carbs, it will hit the stomach, hit the small intestine, and immediately get absorbed to your bloodstream. So the insulin follows it right away. Now, as I said earlier, insulin is good for life. You need it. Your pancreas makes it 24 hours a day. But ups and downs and large spikes of insulin is not good over time. So the glycemic index, the word glycemic comes from two words, glucose, which is sugar, and emia, which is blood in Greek. So the level of sugar in your blood sugar, which is what you see when you prick your finger if you're diabetic, and the index, which is a measurement of how fast the blood sugar rises when you consume a carb. That's all that glycemic index is. And the rule to remember is that the more refined the carbohydrate, the faster and the higher the insulin level that follows that sugar consumption will be. So you want to avoid that. A slower form of carb is a complex carb. And here the prima donna are the legumes, the category of the legumes. They have some of the lowest GI index there. And then here in whole grain cereals, I personally believe that we're not meant to eat cereals every day. That's another thing, people say we became an agrarian society 20,000 years ago, 30,000 years ago, and agronomy is everything. It did bring with it, and it's part of evolution, and it did bring with it the ability to stay in society and not have to be spread around and be hunters and gatherers for the rest of our existence. And it's gotten us to where we are. But that doesn't mean that you have to have rice, corn, and wheat available 365 days a year. That's also another thing. Raymond mentioned earlier in one of his jokes how, depending where we're from, whether we're from the equator, warm climates, or cold climates, we tend to prepare better, right? That joke couldn't have been a better segue to this. In colder climates where there's 4 seasons, where winter is harsh, you don't have some of these grains. Yes, we're capable of storing them, and that produces food availability year-round. But again, the human body was not meant to abuse of rice, potato, and wheat and bread every single day. So you come back to the same point. We are an agrarian society, we became one, but that doesn't mean you have to eat grains every single day. And remember, fruit has a high glycemic index already, but fruit comes in a natural matrix, comes with a packaging, fiber, a lot of vitamins. So if you actually crave something sweet after a meal, forget the cheesecake, grab an apple, grab an orange, and believe me, after you eat an apple, you'll feel full. And maybe then if you want a treat, you take one bite of a dessert that's a processed dessert, and then instead of eating the whole slice of cheesecake, which is usually not a small slice. All right, so bottom line, we already talked about this. Avoid high glycemic carbs. Eat mostly complex carbs. Eliminate this or severely restrict the simple forms. And then hypoglycemia. You know, there's two camps here. If you ask physicians, some believe the diagnosis exists, but that's probably about 10% of physicians. 90% of you know, modern trained physicians don't believe in the diagnosis of hypoglycemia. So if a person taught you, or some literature you read taught you that you need to consume sugar because you become lightheaded and you become tired and you become fatigued because you have hypoglycemia, you need to seriously first verify that you have that diagnosis, so go to a trustworthy physician. And second, it's your diet that's probably causing the yo-yoing of this glucose, which when the glucose drops too much and the excess insulin is present after consuming a lot of carbs, you get sleepy. So hypoglycemia in and of itself is not really a valid or accepted clinical diagnosis. All right, a little test. What kind of carbs are these? Refined or complex? Simple or complex carbs? Refined. So here's the origin of these products, right? You see wheat, you see millet, and you see rye. So rye, millet, and wheat are all grains. But you can't just eat the wheat off the chaff. You know, you can't digest it, so you have to process that and you have to refine it down to flour. I'm sure you've seen flour on the shelf in the supermarket, and when you look at the white flour, if you read in the small print, it says enriched. Why would we have to enrich the flour? The manufacturer, the food producer, milled it down, refined it to such a white, bleached flour that it has no nutritional value. All it's giving you is calories, but it's lost all its nutritional value. So they add vitamin B1, B2, and B12 back to it after the processing, and that's called enriched. That tells you something. You know, wait a second, you're giving me white flour. Why do I need flour? So again, consume in moderation. We'll get to that later. So that's a form of refined carbs. Now this slide, on the other hand, shows all sorts of legumes. Pinto beans, black beans, fava beans, I guess borlotti beans. I mean, there's, you know, literally dozens of varieties of beans. This is rice. Probably you can't see it because it's a little small, but rice comes in many different sizes and shapes because rice, you know, it's a species of plant. If you look at the longer grain, darker rice, that's the healthiest rice because it has a little bit of a husk on it. It's also known as forbidden rice. Basmati rice is kind of in the middle. Forbidden rice is this black long grain rice right here. And actually it has a very pleasant fragrance when you're boiling it. And it has a nutty taste to it. Needs very little condiment to it. No salt. If you're already salting your piece of protein like chicken or fish or whatever you're going to have with it, it's a great thing to do is try to just, when you go to the supermarket, look at different varieties of rice and go to the darkest and the longest grain. Again, a little bit of fiber on the grain of the rice will slow down the absorption, so it makes it a slow carb. Here you have potatoes. Potatoes, again, they're high in starch, but they're natural. They're not processed. Try to eat potato rather than mashed potato. Mashed potato is a lot of butter, a lot of cream, and a lot of milk. This is oatmeal. Again, there's two types of oatmeal. There's instant oatmeal and then there's steel-cut oats. Steel-cut oats are minimally processed. That requires about 3 to 5 minutes of boiling. So yes, those oats are not ready to go, but they have a lower glycemic index because you have to boil them. The instant oats, which you know the brand names of most of them, they're full of sugar. And they're instant because they've been highly refined, so you can just add hot water and you're ready to go, but it's full of sugar. Here's a pumpkin, okra, quinoa, which is now in vogue. Everybody thinks it's a miracle food, although it was eaten 3,000 years by the people in the Andes. And it's a semi-grain. It's classified as a grain/legume. It's interesting, but it has a higher protein content than the average grains if you compare it to any cereals like or wheat or rye. And it has a nutty taste to it. It has to be boiled, but you don't need to add much more to it. And it can substitute for rice.
Just interrupt you say quinoa. Something I've noticed a lot of us local people, us here, don't know about it. It's something new, even though it says 3,000 years old. Ervin introduced me to it about a year ago, and it's really very good. And if you cook it with a little bit of like onion or garlic, quinoa, you can find it at the salads and make it very, very good and very healthy. It has very, very little carbohydrate or sugar.
Exactly. It's a slow carb. It releases the carbs very slowly, comparable to legumes, and it's not high in carb content overall. So it's an excellent source of food, especially for vegetarians or vegans. They like to eat this and the beans to try to get their protein. And this, of course, these are all vegetables, raw. I mean, you can't go wrong there. They're all low glycemic, low carb, complex carbs. These are simple carbs, yes, but this is nature's form. This is nature's treat. This is nature's form of a dessert, And believe me, you cannot eat 3 apples after a meal as a dessert, but you can easily eat a piece of cheesecake after a dessert. And that piece alone can give you another 800 calories after you just ate a 1,000-calorie meal. There's a restaurant in the United States named after that dessert. And it's called The Factory. This tells, I rest my case. So anyway, this is a summary of what I just said. Bottom line is this. I already spoke about that. Just look at this list here. Prolonged elevated insulin levels in your blood are bad because of this. Because they lead to hardening of the arteries. They lead to fat tissue buildup. They cause, insulin causes fatigue. Insulin causes the muscles over time to become resistant to that hormone. If there's too much insulin going on and it's constantly spiking in your blood, your body, your muscle tissue goes into a mechanism that's called down-regulation. So it sends the receptor signals down so that it doesn't respond that quickly to insulin, because too much insulin is harmful. Too much insulin leads to weight gain, and the body senses that, so it tries to turn it off. But if you don't change the diet, which is the culprit that's stimulating that release of insulin, you're constantly going to down-regulate your muscles, but keep increasing your insulin, and that leads to insulin resistance, also known as glucose intolerance, which is synonymous to insulin resistance, or some people might have read about the metabolic syndrome or the pre-diabetes. All of it comes down to this. It leads to elevation of uric acid. By the way, people who have gout, a low protein diet, low animal protein diet, does not work. That's not the culprit for gout. Okay? And 90% of physicians still believe that. Ironically, during my training, and yes, this is going to go on tape, my father and I had a discussion about it, because as I was coming through my medical training, he was having a change of mind. I mean, remember the old days, people thought that peptic ulcers were treated with a glass of milk. Oh, drink milk for that acidity you're feeling. Well, all it did was temporarily, lessen the pain in the stomach, but later it would make more acid production from the stomach as a rebound effect, so your peptic ulcer got worse. So don't treat gastritis with milk. And the same thing, the old concept of meat being the cause of the elevated uric acid is no longer accepted by all physicians. It's really because you overburden the liver, and the liver now has to shunt all its work to the carbs, and then the chemical pathway that takes care of uric acid is slowed down. So uric acid starts building in your blood rather than you peeing it out, and rather than you converting it in the products that you pee out. So anyway, there's a list. I just put a few there. There's a list of many, many problems of having a high level of insulin at all times. So if you consume a lot of simple sugars, a lot of refined carbs, and this is a list of them, you're constantly spiking your insulin. If your breakfast starts, and again, I was born and raised on this island. Pastichi is a staple food. Croquette is a staple food on the island. I'm not saying you never should eat these. But again, if you eat that every day as your breakfast, you have to make compensations for that in your lunch and your dinner. Because what is a pastichi? It's flour. White bleached flour. Then, if that weren't enough to get your insulin going, let's deep fry it, put some oil behind it, and throw some cheese in it. So you've got a double whammy of fat, cheese, and the oil it was fried in, and you have a vehicle, an envelope of white flour. Maybe a little bit of vegetable in it if you eat a chop soy pastichi, but that's about it. So, and that little vegetable was deep fried, so there's no nutritional value to that vegetable. So a pastichi is something that you should treat yourself to maybe once or twice a week. And if you start your day with that, imagine your insulin just shot up high. And if you eat 2 pastichis and a croquette to go, you can guarantee your insulin level is sky high until lunchtime. If you do it all over again at lunchtime, which is a mistake that on this island is committed very often, very frequently, and we're sort of mirroring the United States, is people put 3 sources of carbohydrates in one sitting. You go to a restaurant, you get a nice piece of fish. I mean, we have great fresh fish. It's the best lean protein you want to eat. But they bring it out to you grilled, perhaps not pan-fried, so it doesn't have the oil, it doesn't have the flour, and you think you're getting a nice piece of mahi, clean protein, but then you have funchi, pambati, and rice. Why? Of those three, I would tell you right now, I'd rather you eat a little more rice and leave the funchi and pambati out. Or, you want the funchi, which is yellow maize, yellow corn flour, have a little more funchi, leave the pambati and the rice out. Now, you want to have the pambati, which is, it's essentially flour. Okay, have a little more of that, but eliminate the other two. Having 3 sources of carbohydrate with every meal is the problem. And, I know it's supposedly culture, but then again, I don't remember my grandfather, who's 96, eating 3 carbohydrates with every meal he had. They barely had enough to eat 1 carbohydrate source. So they actually had to go by donkey back in the days and find food and come back and bring it home. So they actually did exercise to get their food. All right. That was all about nutrition. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a plan, a little bit of a, if you will, a prescription. Not everybody in the room wants to diet. Not everybody in the room wants to lose weight. But this is not just for weight loss. In general, it's a good rule for health as well. So if you want to lose weight, what you don't want to lose is muscle, and you don't want to lose water. If you want to lose weight, you want to lose body fat. That's the excess weight that you don't want. But when you stand on a scale and you look at the scale, everything that's on you and in you is on that scale. So if, for example, I weigh 175 pounds, if I look at the scale and I have my shoes on, I have my clothes on, it will increase a few more pounds. So don't look at the scale. Actually, I haven't owned the scale now for 17 years. Throw the scale out. Make the mirror your best friend and just feel how your clothes fit. If your clothes fit better over a few weeks or a few months, you're heading in the right direction. If you look better in the mirror, you see a little more toning and definition, that's what you're losing, body fat. But don't lose body protein and don't lose water. So there's 3 ways basically to lose body fat. Either you manipulate your nutrition, you manipulate the level of exercise, or you use drugs or take supplements or do something of the like. This is not the ideal, and this is for another talk. Raymond said, sometime I want you to talk to them about exercise, so today we're focusing on the diet. So here's 5 simple rules. Just 5 simple rules, and I propose you challenge yourself 30 days. So do this for 30 days, for a month if you want to, and see if you can stick to this. Simplicity is the rule here. I'm trying to simplify it because if you make things complex, there's a high chance of failure. So a decent diet that you're going to stick to is better than a great or perfect diet that you're going to drop in 2 weeks. Rule number 1, avoid the refined carbs. I think you know that by now. Rule number 2, find a few meals that you like. Few recipes. And if you're not the one cooking at home, great. Share it with your spouse, your partner, your friend, whoever is living with you that prepares your meals. And just pass along the information and say, listen, I'm going to do this. You don't have to join me, but if you're making the food, would you do this for me when you cook, when you prepare the food? Why do you want to find 4 or 5 recipes and repeat them over and over again? Because it makes for quick preparation of food, simple. It doesn't overwhelm your mind to think and prepare for the next day. You already have to go to work. Most of you here are at some managerial level. You have employees under you. You have enough. You have your kids. You have your family. You have enough worries. Keep it simple. And again, if you go to the supermarket and you want to cook like a chef and you go for all the exotic products, you're spending more in the grocery store. So just find a few meals that you like and repeat them over and over again. Number 3, don't drink your calories. This I can't overstate this enough. I just came from Bolivia. Raymond says he's also half Latin. I'm half Latin. My father comes from Bolivia. I was there visiting the family last week. No one drinks water. No one drinks water, as if water never existed. Never mind that water is the essence of life. They're looking for water on Mars to see if we can go populate Mars. They drink all sorts of concoctions of grains or fruit. They take plums, they dehydrate the plum, make a prune, then they put it into a big vat, and they add table sugar to it. And let it sit there, and they call that mocochinchi, which is a sort of a, it's just a sugary drink. That's what it is. Everything is sugared. If not, they grab fruit, they throw it not in the Vitamix, they throw it into the juicer, and tell you, oh, here's the orange juice. Actually, I would have rather they just hand squeeze the orange. It would have at least had some pulp to go with it. So don't drink your calories. You can easily drink your calories. I have a slide on that and you'll see where the sources come from. Just drink water. Get used to it. Now, this rule, I'm not saying never eat fruit. just your 30-day challenge, for your 30-day challenge, try not to do it. Later you introduce it. Remember, we've evolved not having fruit 365 days a year. A lot of our ancestors above the equator, even though I was born and raised here, and before I left Aruba I thought this was the center of the earth. We year-long summer, never winter. You don't have, like Raymond was saying, if you can just wake up tomorrow and go and pluck a banana off the tree and shoot a fish and catch a fish, you don't think about lack of food. Just remind yourself the rest of the world is not that way. So fruit did not exist 365 days a year. Now you go to the supermarket, you find fruit any time of the year. Even if it's winter and it's 3 feet of snow in Boston, they'll find fruit. That's not natural. That was not meant to be that way for us. So eat fruit in moderation. The first 30 days, try to actually avoid it, just for this challenge. And this is probably the most important rule of the 5. We're humans. We're going to err. And actually all of us, if you look at our history, our life, we're all cyclical. We all yo-yo diet in one way or another. Whether you like it or not. There are times you eat less, at times you eat more, and that varies. That's human. So what do you do with that? Embrace it and control it, rather than letting it control you. If you know you're going to have times that you're eating more than others, you know the holidays are coming up, end of the year, Christmas, whatever it may be, and Aruba celebrates plenty of holidays, then control it. Factor it in and pick one day a week, and that's your cheat day, that's your off day. That day, literally, you want to eat pancakes all day? Go ahead. You want Aunt Jemima syrup on it? Go ahead. You want to eat pasta for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Do it. That's your cheat day. All rules are gone. Just eat whatever you want. What's going to happen is the first couple of times you do that, if Saturday is your cheat day, you'll do it 2 or 3 Saturdays. After a month, you're actually going to say, you know what, I'll just cheat with the breakfast and lunch, and dinner I'll go back to my normal. You're going to start feeling, because you're eating clean from Monday through Friday, you're going to start feeling that stuff is too sweet for you, too heavy for you. The pizza, I didn't need 3 slices. 1 slice was enough, So the cheat day is important. It actually also does something to your thyroid we'll talk about later. So quickly, let's look at each 5 rules broken down. Rule number 1 was avoid all refined carbs, right, for 30 days. This is what you need to avoid. I know potatoes are natural, they're there, but for the first 30 days, avoid these. Okay? Definitely flour. And a little thing here, aloxan is something used by the food industry to turn food back brown when food has been bleached. Rice that's been turned white and then bleached, if they want to make it a little brown back again to make it appealing, they use aloxan. But that actually binds to some of the amino acids in food, and in rats and mice causes diabetes. So when we do experiments in science and we want to induce diabetes in an animal that's not meant to have diabetes, like a rat, that's what we use. So why would we humans want to eat it? And I don't care if you tell me there's not enough research to show that aloxan in humans produces diabetes. I'm content enough to know that it produces diabetes in mice, and it's not a natural chemical, and if you just bleached my food and made it white, why are you going to turn it back brown to sell it to me? So, and it's in many, many foods. Okay, that was rule number 1. Rule number 2, repeat the same meals over and over, keep it simple. Remember, perfection is enemy of the good. If you strive for perfection, it's great in other areas of life. When it comes to this, nutrition, just keep it simple, and I'd rather you have a good diet, decent diet that you're going to stick to, than a perfect diet that you're going to drop in 2 weeks. Costs less at the grocery to eat simple. You can mix and match out of 3 groups, which is the next slide I'll show you. And then just prepare them over and over again. Choose those 4 or 5 meals a week. You keep it simple. Or you ask the person who's making your meals for you. If you do microwave, if you choose to microwave, which is fine sometimes for certain things, don't use plastic, just use glass. And Pyrex, I know that back in April, Raymond sent me an email. People were asking me if I recommended Pyrex. Pyrex is a brand. Again, my disclosure slide was very clear. I'm not endorsing anybody. You can use whatever brand you want as long as you use glass instead of plastic in the microwave. And here comes the cheating once a week. We have a slide on that later on. So these are the 3 groups that you want to focus on for those 30 days. Pick a protein, pick a legume, this is your carb, and then pick a vegetable. That's where your micronutrients come from. Remember, you want to get your vitamins and minerals. If you pick one of the 3 groups here and you make 4 or 5 meals and you repeat them every day, those 4 weeks, that month is going to go by quickly, and you're going to feel great, you're going to lose some weight. If you don't have to lose weight, you already look great, you're only going to feel better. Proteins, okay, eggs, chicken, beef, fish, pork. you can add there lamb, for example. I didn't put it there, but I like lamb, and it's good because it's not a industrially raised animal. It's not in feedlots. So it's usually not subject to living and standing in its own excrements, and it's not injected with hormones, and it's not fed antibiotics. So we don't have a lot of game on the island, you know, but with game, you know, I mean like deer and other types of rare meats, or boar, stuff that they hunt in the US. But lamb, if you can get that, that's a good clean protein source. Turkey, I didn't put it up there. So that, and you can use one each day. You know, you don't have, there's another slide about animal protein. I don't think we need animal protein every day. There's an obsession with that, but there's no evidence for that. So you pick one of these, you combine it with lentils, and then you add your veggies. And this, you don't have to limit. You can add as much vegetables as you want. The calories are very few, but the nutritional benefits are large. So just, if you want to eat okra and you want to pile up your plate with okra, do it. Some people told me, well, you know, the legumes bother my digestion. I don't want to be all day with some gas, and especially if I'm going into meetings and stuff. It's true. It requires a little adaptation of the digestive tract. But once you've introduced beans, after about 2 or 3 weeks, the flora is the microbiome of microbes, of bacteria that live in your gut, adapt. They adapt to that, and especially if you start eating cleaner and you start eliminating all the other refined carbs, and they start digesting and breaking down the beans better. So, and boil them. Boil the beans well. Don't boil them halfway and then they're still kind of raw, because edamame is one of the exceptions where when you boil it, you don't want to boil it to a mush. And when you go to a restaurant, you can tell that the edamame is a little nutty and it's a little crunchy. But in general, boil the legumes. That helps the digestion. And after a couple of weeks, your digestive tract will get used to the digestion of beans, and you'll have less gas. Rule number 3, remember, don't drink your calories. I've said that enough times. Here's just an example. Try to drink water, 4 to 8 glasses a day, anywhere between that. If you're having a hot day in Aruba, most days are hot. If you're running around doing things, you're sweating, increase to 6, 7, 8 glasses. If you're just an average person, 3 or 4 glasses a day is fine. This is for the average person, just mind you, again, if you're an athlete, if you're exercising excessively, or not excessively, but a lot more than the average person, you're preparing for a marathon, triathlon, etc., you need much more water than this. But this is not an exercise talk, it's about nutrition for the average individual. Now, you want to drink unsweetened stuff, like tea and coffee, drink it liberally. But if you put 4 tablespoons or teaspoons of sugar in your coffee and you're drinking 4 coffees a day, that's 4 times 4, that's 16 teaspoons of sugar. It adds up very quickly. So you want to try to use things like cinnamon in your coffee. You get used to that. It gives a little sweet taste to it. If you don't want to use cinnamon, you can use some stevia. And if you put a little bit of cream, sometimes just 1 tablespoon of cream, full cream, not half and a half, heavy cream. It has no sugar because it has no milk. It's pure cream. What cream is, known as room here in Dutch, it's fat separated from the milk, so the lactose sugar is gone from the milk. So you have no sugar, and a little bit of cream goes a long way. If you put it in your coffee, you take the bitterness away of the coffee, then you don't have to put as much sugar. So you can play with that and decrease the amount of sugar you're using. Wine. Red wine has lower glycemic index and lower carbs than white wine. So if you want to drink a glass of wine a day, it's fine. Red wine, okay. If you're doing the white wine, I would stick to 2 glasses a week. Again, this is not for the rest of your life. This is for 30 days, just to do sort of a reboot, if you will, and some of you, if you want to lose some weight. Avoid sodas, please. You know, all you're doing is enriching the bottling companies. I shall not mention them, but you know who they are. And diet soda is worse. They don't have sugar, but they have a chemical to sweeten it. So just, again, if you're going to, well, on your cheat day, mind you, on your Saturday or Sunday, whatever cheat, drink all the sodas you want. To the point where you want to vomit it, that's fine. You'll get used to saying, I don't actually need soda. If I've gone from Monday through Friday without my Dr. Pepper or my Diet Sprite or my Coke Zero, why am I obsessing about it? So the cheat day is there for that also, to remind you that sometimes you obsess about something just because you were told not to do it. Number 4, avoid fruit. Again, I've beleaguered this point to death by now. You understand that fruit is nature's way of sugar. It's good for you. It has vitamins, it has minerals, and it has fiber. But don't eat it every day. You know, as I moved and I left Aruba at the age of 18, I lived in 2 different countries with 4 seasons. And then you realize, oh, wait a second, the strawberries are not on the shelf between November and March. So, and that's okay. I'm not going to die without strawberries or blueberries. But instead, they're flown in 2,000 miles from Florida to keep you happy in Boston. So you don't need fruit every day. And this is the favorite rule. Most people email me after that and say, I love your 5 rules, but I love the cheat day because I can eat whatever I want. And you know what happens? Follow-up emails. They tell me, you know, after I did it for a month, I realized that when I cheat, when Saturday comes, I know I'm going to have dinner with my friends, I'm going to have my cocktails, I'm going to have my beer, I'm going to have my pizza, I'm going to have my pasta, I'm going to eat the microwavable food, I'm going to eat the ice cream bar, whatever it is you cheat on. They tell me after a month or two, my cheat days, I'm not craving what I really did at the beginning anymore, so I'm cheating less and less, and I'm actually cheating only on breakfast. Because then I get my fix, and the rest of the day I go back to a clean salad with clean protein on it. So do it. Embrace the fact that we all are truly cyclic eaters. We have ups and downs. But embrace it and manage it. Take control of it. Don't let it take control of you. So when you program that day off to cheat on your diet, you're actually going to be in control of it. And you're looking forward to it. And after a while, you allow the body also to readapt. Because when you cheat, the thyroid, that day, you suddenly eat 3,000 calories or 4,000 calories, and all the other days you're eating the normal caloric requirement you need. It shocks the thyroid into staying functioning at a high level. Because when you eat clean and you lower your calories a little bit, your thyroid tends to, it's like the thermostat of the air conditioner. It tends to shut its functioning down within a couple of weeks. So if you have that one cheat day a week, it shocks the thyroid in to stay fast, and that keeps your metabolism fast, and that keeps you from gaining weight. So, once you've done your 30-day challenge of cutting the carbs, when and how much do you introduce? Well, I say 30 days. You can keep this going for life if you want to make it a lifestyle. If you want to do it 2 weeks, that's fine. If you want to do it just 1 week, and by the end of the week you can't stand it anymore, that's fine. Do it as long as you want, but I recommend a month because that will give you a good time to actually really cleanse your body and feel the benefit of eating wholesome foods. Then which ones do you want to introduce? I mean, there's a long list. I just put a few up there. Pumpkin, potatoes, avocados, rice, just the previous slide, you were asking me about the changes I made. I made a few tweaks. I gave this talk in April. Here's where I made a change. I eliminated the cereals. Why? Because, and the bread. Although my slide said whole grain, 7-grain bread. There's one here on the island called Volkoren. That's one of the most whole grain breads you can find on the island, but still it's bread. Bread does not grow on a tree. And so my slide said reintroduce it in moderation twice a week. What happens? They go back to eating bread every day, 3 times a day, because a little sandwich in the morning, a little sandwich lunch, and dinner is easy, it's convenient. But again, you're eating bread 3 times a day. You don't need bread all the time. So if you want to put here reintroduce bread, whole grain bread, that's fine. Just be, you know yourself, you know how much you can control certain things. All right, so those were the 5 rules. Now a few closing slides on tips, just tricks and tips to keep you sticking to this kind of plan. When you reintroduce some foods, you have to remember, how often am I going to eat them? So I basically split it in 2 categories, rarely or moderately. Okay, rarely by definition, and we have to work with definitions here, because if we say moderation, I'm sure the 20 people in this room have a different definition of moderation, each one of us. So eating something rarely, I consider once or twice a month. That's rare. That's almost never, but you still get it in once or twice a month. So anything that has a wrapper. If it has a wrapper and it has a label on it, I know everyone's telling you if you want to have good nutrition, you have to learn to read labels. It's true in part. But if you're eating something with a label on it every day, you're already eating processed foods, because an apple doesn't come with a label on it. So that's a good rule. If it has a wrapper with a label and it has an expiration date on the side of it and it says expires in 2018, you shouldn't be eating it. You might eat it once or twice a month, but not every day. Look at the shelf life of your foods. Frozen dinners, like microwavable food, all that stuff, stay away from it most of the time. If you have to, a couple times a month, do it, okay. Or on your cheat day once a week, if you really want to resort to this, fine. Fried foods, same thing. It's not that I don't eat fried foods. I'll eat some fried okra, I'll eat some fried chicken sometimes, but I'm not eating it every day. Foods that you can reintroduce in moderation, which means maybe once or twice a week rather than once or twice a month. Nuts, yes, nuts are good, but again, it's very energy intensive to take nuts out of their shell. I don't know if you've ever seen almonds. You know, you get almonds in the supermarket ready, peeled, roasted and salted, ready for you. If you've looked at them in nature, they come with the husk and the covering, and that's a tough peel. So the machines have to do all this energy. It's very energy intensive, and that plops out one almond. So there's hundreds of thousands of almonds going through the machine to give you that, and they're very, very dense in calorie, nuts. They're very rich in calories because they have natural fats, and they're great for nutrients. But again, if you're going to eat nuts every day, you might actually end up gaining a little bit of weight. So, you know, a palm size 2 or 3 times a week, that's fine. Again, moderation, not every day. Meats, I said earlier, you might eat more protein from the 3 groups for this 30-day challenge. But honestly, there is no evidence that humans need to eat animal protein source every day of the week. There's no evidence for that. I'm not telling you become vegetarian or vegan. That's a personal decision. Many people make that decision based on animal rights. Others make it on just, they're trying to stay away from animal food because of the way it's being produced, massive right now due to the agro business, and they don't agree with antibiotics in their food or hormones. Whatever your choice and your preference is, I'm not here to tell you how to do it or why to do it, but if you choose to eat meat, you don't need it every day. So just so you know, if you skipped meat or animal protein, I'm putting meat there, but I mean animal protein. So poultry, fish, eggs, animal protein, or turkey, they're all animal protein. If you missed it one day, please don't get obsessed and the next day try to binge eat and try to make up for what you didn't eat. Again, cereals, once or twice a week, okay, not every day. By the way, I've never seen a whole grain cereal, I've never tasted one that really is pleasant. There's a brand, Kashi, that makes very whole grain cereal, but again, it tastes kind of bland. And they have some that are better now. They actually, when they first came out, they weren't accepted as much, but now they're a little bit better. So again, it goes to show you, cereals, to be palatable, to be actually pleasant and enjoyable when eating, cereals are highly sweetened. They have to be sweetened because otherwise they don't taste like much. So keep them, you know, in moderation. A few more tips. I think we've spoken about this throughout the talk, so I'm just going to go through this slide very quickly. Fruit, we know why you don't want to eat the fruit during the 30 days that you're doing your carb cutting. You know, if you want to choose some fruit, avoid the high glycemic index fruits like banana, grapes, watermelon, and use citruses, berries, apples, papaya. I know some of these don't grow on the island. Again, Aruba has a very arid climate. You know, we don't have an abundance of food. As a matter of fact, we don't have much food at all, and we depend on imports. That's why food quality here is not that great, and it's hard to find organic food. It's hard to find organic fruits, vegetables that are not frozen in a container for many weeks. Dairy, I'll go over this very quickly, but you know, you can, Judith, you can give them this version of the presentation at the end. You can email it. You know, you can then read this with a little more pause. Bottom line is this. You don't want to eliminate all dairy. You don't have to. Some do. I did it for 7 years. Literally all dairy. No cheese, no yogurt, and I never missed it. I've reintroduced a little bit of that. I like some sour cream or yogurt or cheese sometimes. Again, not daily. But those are fermented dairy products. It's not milk. It's milk fermented by bacteria which consume the lactose in the milk, take it out for you, so they make it naturally a low-carb product. And the fermentation of the milk is actually good for you. You might have heard of kefir, for example, and clotted milk, and because they have live bacteria, the so-called probiotics, that now they're selling you at $80 a pop, capsules that you buy. By the way, not all probiotics are good. Some of them have to be live, and then when they're live, they come in shipped in containers that are kept cold because that bottle has to be kept in the fridge. So, you know, back hundreds of years ago, when there was no refrigeration, people used to do this. You know, they used to ferment milk in order to keep it. That's how cheese was born. I mean, that's what cheese is a fermented product of dairy. So if you want to consume dairy, still, you just can't give it up. Just eliminate milk. Eat the other dairy products and you'll be okay. But again, not every single day, 3 times a day. This is more on dairy. People asked me to expand on it. After that, I got some emails saying, why not, why not? So it's all here. It's 2 lengthy slides on dairy, and you can read it at your leisure. But again, remember, there are communities and societies on this earth that have never had milk from a cow. They've had their mother's milk, breastfed, and if the woman cannot breastfeed for whatever reason, the child, then there's a medical reason or whatever, you can get a formula. But after the age of 1 year or 2 years old, a human does not need to go to a cow and drink their milk. So what do you use instead? Because some people say, I just need that white liquid. If I'm not going to drink milk, what am I going to put in my cereal? Again, are you eating cereal 7 days a week? You shouldn't. But if you are, and you can't give it up, and you want something that's milky in appearance, and not exactly in taste, but similar, use plant milks. Almond, coconut, cashew, rice, soy, so on. This is a non-animal source of milk. It's not cow or it's not goat milk. It's a plant source. Just make sure it doesn't have a ton of sugar in it. When you look at the label, 1 serving is one glass, about this size. It's not bigger. It's a pretty small glass, about 8 to 10 ounces. And that contains 22 grams of sugar. So if you find the coconut or the almond or the hazelnut or the rice milk, make sure it's unsweetened on the box. Yes, it doesn't taste very sweet, but again, your palate is going to get used to it as you're eating cleaner. Cereals, we've talked about them. Preferentially, I would say eat them once or twice a week, not every day. Meats, I've said it again over and over. This is just a summary slide. You can live, and for those of you that are, vegans or vegetarians, that's fine. This doesn't even apply to you. Here's for those that don't eat any animal protein whatsoever. I did that, by the way, for 1.5 years. I was completely vegan. And you can get by with getting your protein from plant sources rather than animal sources. Mainly the legumes, they're the best. Quinoa is there again, like Raymond was saying. Amaranth, which is a cousin of quinoa. Again, it's an Andean grain. It grows in the Andes very well. Buckwheat, or if you sprout seeds. If you have the time to do it at home and you sprout your own alfalfa seeds, or a lot of seeds can actually be sprouted and eaten within a day or two. They're very high in vitamins and minerals. So, a long slide, but the bottom line is this. If you eat a varied diet, and you eat a wholesome diet, you really don't need to take supplements. If you're a person who's preparing for an endurance sport, it's a different story. You're probably in the 5% of the population or less, 1% of the population. The average individual who exercises 2-3 times a week, moderately, 30 minutes at a time, and eats a varied diet, a wholesome diet, not refined, you do not need supplements. You're going to survive, and you're going to be pretty healthy. Just avoid the typical junk food that's actually what's making us diabetics, obese, and hypertensives. And there's plenty of evidence right now of both against and in favor of supplementation, and that's why I say I'm a conservative, not on my political views all the time, but in medicine. So I tend to wait for a few more years to go so that the pendulum swings the other way. Because, just this morning actually, when I opened my email, there is a New England Journal of Medicine, which is a reputable medical journal, just published, taking calcium supplements does not reduce the incidence of fracture and did not increase the bone mineral density of a DEXA scan in participants high enough to be considered clinically significant. So I'm going to tell patients from now on, for 40, 50 years we've been telling you, take calcium, If you don't live above the latitude of, let's say, Florida or Georgia, Atlanta, you don't really need to worry about vitamin D. You get enough sun. If you live Boston, Holland, the UK, those places, you probably need to take vitamin D for the 6 months out of the year that you're in the winter and the fall, because you don't get enough sunlight. But taking calcium apparently doesn't help. And this study was done on 45,000 patients. So it just came out this morning. As a matter of fact, Raymond always tells me, I know you stay up to date, bring the most current. Well, I don't know how much more current that can be. It was this morning. So again, you see the pendulum swings every which way. I used to tell patients, take calcium if you want, 1 or 2 capsules is enough. By the way, milk, you can get calcium. 1 cup of green peas has more calcium than a glass of milk. The only difference, the glass of milk actually has a little more calcium in it when it's been sold to you, is because the dairy industry added calcium. It does not come, a glass of whole milk from the farm does not have more calcium than a cup of green peas. So it's added there, and by the way, the bioavailability of the calcium in the milk is not better than the calcium that comes out of the green peas. All right, if you cook, or if you don't and someone else cooks, you can tell them this. Mushrooms are a great source of glutamates, and glutamates get a bad rep because Chinese restaurants or Asian Oriental cooking tends to use monosodium glutamates. We've all heard about it. Actually, glutamate happens in nature. It's a normal occurring flavor enhancer. It's present in tomatoes, it's present in mushrooms, and it's present in bone marrow. Remember your grandma making the soup and putting the ham bone in it? That bone, or the ossobuco, which is the bone of the leg of the cow, it has marrow, and the marrow has fat, which enhances flavor, but it also has glutamates in it. So MSG, monosodium glutamate, is man-made crystalline glutamate and sold to you in a powder. And again, like anything that's white in a powder is bad for you. If you start adding MSG to a meal, yeah, the people will come back to your restaurant. But you're making a meal artificially enhanced in flavor that wasn't meant to be. But mushrooms contain glutamates. So does a bone if you put a bone in your soup. So use those tricks to enhance the flavor of your food rather than just piling on more salt. Mirepoix is the term used by the French. As we know, the French have a great history in culinary history. They still set the tone in terms of good food and especially delicious food. And the mirepoix is the basis of almost all dishes. It contains aromatic vegetables and herbs, which are basically the ones you know: garlic, onion, carrots, celery, and some herbs in there. That's a mirepoix. Sofrito is how it's known in Spain. The Italians have a little variation on it. Instead of the celery, they'll put more tomato. Saffron, the Spaniards use a lot. That's a way to enhance flavor by using condiments and herbs and spices rather than just piling on more oil or salt. Veggies. They came in nature with a lot of vitamins and minerals, and they have sometimes a little raw taste. So yes, steaming your vegetables or blanching them very quickly is okay. But if you train your palate to eat vegetables without salt or oil or butter, you're going to learn to actually appreciate them more. Because if you're having a steak which has a piece of fat on it and it has fat in the meat, and you have salt on the steak, that's where you're going to get your craving. That's where you're going to get your fix of salt. So try not to salt your veggies so you have the contrast. That's actually a nice thing to have on a plate when you have different food items that taste differently. If you grab the salt shaker on everything, well, then why are you eating 3 different things? You just might as well eat one big piece of steak with salt on it. So try to not salt your veggies. Over time, you'll actually start to appreciate them plain and just a little bit steamed. When you're making a salad dressing, and I recommend people to make your own salad dressing, and you'll see why. If you make it and you put it in the fridge, in 3 days it goes bad. So what do you think that salad dressing that's on the shelf in the supermarket has in it to last 6 months? The shelf life is 6 months to a year when you look at the expiration date. So if you make your own salad dressings and you think it needs more salt, sometimes a little bit of vinegar is that actual taste that you're looking for on the salad instead of more salt. Eggplant, vegans or vegetarians might be present today. If you don't eat meat, eggplant is an excellent meat substitute. And sometimes I do a stir fry with eggplant. You just chop it up in cubes, you put a little bit of oil in a wok, and you stir fry the eggplant as if you would stir fry chicken or beef. It has some glutamates in it, just like the mushrooms do. And actually, if you cut up some mushrooms and eggplant, you put some soy sauce, a little bit of salt, and you stir fry that, I mean, I could eat that easily if I have to skip meat that day. So again, oil. If you're going to stir fry something, and I say stir fry, not deep fry, big difference, huh? Try not to use more than 1 tablespoon a day of oil per person. Again, some days you might use more, but more than 2 tablespoons of oil a day is not really necessary because oil is a refined product. Oil is not available freely. It has to be pressed out of nuts or out of olive, and don't cook with olive oil. I don't care. And this, I know this is like speaking another religion. There's a lot of people on Food Network, thousands literally of chefs cooking with olive oil. Olive oil, if you've taken some basic chemistry in school, you'll know this. Olive oil has a low smoke point. As soon as you heat olive oil above, I can't remember the temperature, but it's a low temperature, you oxidize it. Oxidized oil is like that black, tarry motor oil you're getting out of your car that you haven't serviced for 5 years. Oxidized cooking oil has a high level of free radicals. And free radicals cause oxidative stress. And then you have to start taking more vitamin supplements because your oxidative stress in your diet is affecting your health. So a diet high in deep fried foods and mainly using oil as the frying agent is usually a diet that's very oxidative, a very inflammatory diet. So the oils you can use for stir frying or if you want to deep fry is avocado oil, which has a very high smoke point of 580 Fahrenheit, I think. So you can really, really bring up that pan to a lot of heat to stir fry. Or grapeseed oil. So grapeseed and avocado oil. We couldn't find grapeseed oil yesterday in the supermarket, but we found avocado oil, and I was happy with that. Sometimes sesame oil. You know, the oriental dishes, when you make the stir fries and the Thai food, they use sesame oil. So those are the 3 frying oils that I would recommend if you're going to heat up oil. But do not heat up olive oil. Just put it on your salad. It's to be eaten raw. Olive oil is good for you, but not after you've caused oxidation. Again, I'm not... They asked me to put this there. I can't remember who it was on the talk, but again, it's a brand name, okay? But this is it's a substitute of soy, because soy sauce has a lot of sodium, and a lot of people are trying to cut sodium. There is low sodium soy sauce also, but this particular brand name has some amino acids that enhance flavor, so that you use less salt in your food. Okay, we're wrapping up here. You know, again, if you want to stick to this, it's better to keep it simple and remind yourself that it's better to have a decent diet that you're going to comply with 90% of the time than a perfect diet that you're going to drop in a couple of weeks. So cook in large batches. That makes the food, you know, be available in the fridge, so that when you come at night, you pop it in the microwave, warm it up, and just eat it. And you can do less prepping for the other days. You know, try to, 1 out of the 3 sources on your plate, try to have it raw if possible. If not, a little vegetable like okra, okay, steam it a little bit, but don't overcook your food. Eat only when you're hungry. I know this sounds like a very simple recommendation, but why would you eat when you go to visit someone because you walked in and they tell you, oh, there's a buffet right here, please serve yourself, and you just ate an hour ago because you came from another invitation? Again, small things, but they matter, because if your body is not hungry, and if you're not wanting to eat and someone is giving it to you, and it's not your cheat day, then you should not eat. You know, try to learn a few techniques about how to cook. You know, make a broth. When you add a broth to a stir fry, it enhances the flavor right away. And the broth comes from the day before. If you made a stock, if you made a soup, you can buy broth, actually. You know, I'm not a big cook in terms of elaborate recipes. So I'll buy a broth, chicken broth or a beef broth, and it goes in the fridge, and it goes well for many weeks. You add a little bit of that to a stir fry, it really enhances the flavor. You know, again, try not to use vegetable shortenings or polyunsaturated fats for cooking, because you're oxidizing them. The only oils that are good for cooking are avocado, grapeseed oil, and sesame oil. Again, we talked about this. It's a norm here in Aruba, also, believe me, also in the United States. And in Bolivia, I was shocked. I was just there, I was shocked. 4 carbohydrates on the plate. And then they have what they call tecito. They drink tea at 4 in the afternoon, which I don't know if they adopted that from the British or what. And it's just all pastries, all pastries. So you're getting coffee and tea with pastries at 4. You just had a massive lunch with 4 carbohydrates. Your dinner is coming up with 4 carbohydrates, and you just had tea at 4. I was there for a week, and I told them, you know what, I'm going to start skipping breakfast every day. I'm going to do a prolonged fast. And by the time I get to lunch, tea, and dinner, I was just inundated with food. This is hard to do in Aruba, because, you know, we don't have 4 seasons. We have 1 season. And honestly, our food comes 90% from abroad. So it's hard to do that here, but I've learned to do it over the years by living abroad. And finally, if you have stressors that lead you to eat, then address them with a different coping mechanism. You know, compulsive or emotional eating is probably one of the major culprits of modern society. We have a lot of stress, we have a lot of issues to take care of, and, you know, we have a lot of planning to do. And what happens then? The Snickers bar looks good, fast, easy to grab, and you don't think about the apple. So if the stressors in your life are causing that emotional eating pattern, try to address them, because you're not going to win the battle otherwise. Now, disclosure, I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan. I did cycle through those phases in my life. I tried it because I think sometimes you have to try before you can criticize any approach. I do eat maybe 3 days a week without animal protein. So, you know, actually on the TED Talks, if you look at a TED Talk, there's a guy, I forgot his name, he calls himself the weekday vegetarian. He eats from Monday through Friday vegetarian, and come Saturday and Sunday, he eats everything he can get his hands on. But that is already there a significant reduction in meat consumption, you know. So I liked this phrase because it comes from a clinical nutritionist who's a vegan herself. But it says, does anyone else find it astonishing that we live in a world where eating a plant-based diet is considered drastic or radical, but undergoing open heart surgery, cracking your chest open and receiving toxic chemotherapy is considered standard? Anyway, that's it, guys. Thanks for your attention.